some presentations there that you can take a look at. So we have a right worshipful brother, Rolf Whitstrand, and worshipful brother, Chris Wendover, two fantastic brothers that are going to give us the presentation on Build a Better Beehive Marshall. With that, turn it over to you, right worshipful and worshipful brother. Where do I exit?
Good evening, brethren. Like worship brother Shannon Krukoff stated, we will be going over the Marshal this evening. Before we start, I would like to direct your attention to the left corner of the slide. This is the wheel located on the left. The outer ring will represent those virtues of our fraternity. The spoke is each officer of the lodge, and our brother should ever be at the center. It is to show that as all these virtues are valuable within our lodges, harmony each officer's need represents only a few of them. We will attempt to begin explaining how your duties as the marshal will drive harmony to the beehive, which is a symbol of the cooperative work within the lodge. We will be focusing on ritual and community tonight. And in addition, we will be discussing the formal activities which the marshal is responsible for.
Thank you, worshipful brother Chris. I would also emphasize that the interaction of our ritual and our community together is what the formal presentations of the marshal are concerned with, both within and without the lodge. We're also going to try to explain the responsibilities of the marshal as part of the officer corps and the duties which devolve upon him. And first, before anybody puts the question up, the marshal does not get a 10 star or a 6-shooter. And unfortunately, he has been seen many times to be just an observer within our environment. But for a clearer understanding of the office, I look at a historical position and how it evolved into our present position. Much of the formal structure of Masonry was developed during the 17th and 18th century and drew examples of officers from the practices, titles, and structures around at that time. I believe this is particularly true of a marshal. From its French and German roots, a marshal was by meaning the trusted horse servant or the most trusted servant in the court. Well, let's face it, during the 17th and 18th century, one of your most prized possessions was your horse. So you made sure that the most trusted person you had took care of it. In military terms, the most trusted military leader would have been a field marshal, who was essentially the general in charge of all the rest of the generals. Please do note, though, however, that historically, the most important part of that is most trusted or respected. Historically, in the royal court, the marshal was responsible for assembling important guests who would visit the court or monarch, inform them of the proper protocols of addressing the court by people of importance. The marshal would inform the monarch of the title, rank, and appropriate protocols for the official visit, so that in addressing the visitor, the expected social behaviors relative to the rank above, below, or equal are followed. Because offense during that period could be a prelude to war. And it's always very important, not yet, but I'll get there. I'll tell you next slide. Okay, Chris? But leave it there. Prelude to that, we want to make sure that nobody gets offended, and it's easy to offend people. And for comparisons on current people, think Chief of Staff, or if you happen to like Star Wars, think C3PO, who would be the protocol person. The senior deacon, of course, introduces visitors. The marshal presents people. And those are two different things. Installation. In the installation, the badge of office is the crossed batons, which is the symbol of the authority of the marshal to act and be a direct conduit to the master. Therefore, when he finds out that people come to his lodge, he is directed to take care of all the protocols that are necessary to be able to do the job and keep everything formal as it should be. His direct charge during an installation is to conduct and lead all formal processions inside the lodge and in the public as prescribed by the ritual, the Masonic Code, and the Masonic Manual. As with many officers, he is to serve the worshipful master also in whatever other duties that may be assigned to him. It should be noted that in many grand jurisdictions, the marshal position is only a Grand Lodge officer and not an officer of the local lodge. And we have several of those types of officers within our own Grand Lodge, such as sword bearer, standard bearer, and pursuivant. Next slide. The Masonic Manual essentially describes the formal procedures that a marshal is supposed to participate in and the things he's supposed to run. And most of those are spelled out and are clear because they are written for us in our resources. On the other side, many lodges will define other duties that may be given to a marshal. Some of those are greet the candidates for a first and second and third degree. Review all appropriate words and steps for candidates. Be the chairman of the benevolence committee. Be the chairman of the visitation committee. Present and retire the flag at the opening and closing of stated meetings. This is just a sample list of one of the lodges that I have been at that say, this is what your duties are in addition to the ones prescribed in the manual. Next slide. I took one of the examples that's in the manual and say, what does a marshal do in his responsibility at an installation? Well, actually, he has to do the presenting of all the officers. So one of the duties before that, even though it may not be written out in words, is to make sure all the jewels are available, all the rods are available, the Book of Constitutions are available, the bylaws are available, all the things that are required to be done at the formal installation of officers. And then if you note from the installation, because all of us have been through it, that every one of the people that is going to be installed as an officer is presented, not introduced necessarily. So we are doing a presentation of what we look at as an important person. Next slide. This is another example of what has to happen on the marshal's duties. And I think everybody should know this one because it's part of the lodge recognition program that every lodge is supposed to be able to demonstrate how do you receive Grand Lodge officers and the Grand Master. And of course, since it is a formal visit, he is escorted and presented to the lodge and invited to the east. And all of those duties are done by the marshal. And one that people don't always see is the one that's for the Hiram Award. If you look in the manual, there is a very, very prescribed form for presenting the Hiram Award winner. We don't use it quite that often because most of our Hiram Awards have been given at public installations or public investitures. Okay, there would also be things like the funeral. Next slide. Okay, I guess I'm not there yet. there would be a funeral. If you go into a funeral, actually the procession into the funeral when we are running it or leading it should be led by the marshal, who brings everybody in, seats the brothers, and conducts the worshipful master to the east. We don't always do all of those things, but we should. Since the duties of the marshal include what we consider proper protocols at events, all proper titles of all visitors who are guests are given to the worshipful master. Who do we call supreme? Who do we call most eminent? We even can be confused on who is worshipful, right worshipful, and most worshipful. And then we can take one step further and realize that even those positions might have a different title in the beginning of the name of the brother when coming from a different grand jurisdiction. Some lodges, of course, have the tradition of appointing the immediate past master as the marshal. And they do this so that the experience and knowledge of the protocols are still within the lodge and in the officer corps. Further, it is suggested by many sources that if somebody does not want to talk directly to the master, that they have somebody with whom they may be familiar in the immediate past master, who is supposedly has the ear of the master and can be their person to speak to and speak to the master. So it's a conduit for everybody to be able to get their case heard without having to do it themselves if they feel so inclined. And of course, this is just an outline of the duties and responsibilities that we have for the marshal. And are they absolute? Absolutely not. So I say absolute twice. It depends more on the history of the lodge and the experience and the knowledge of the person appointed to the position. Chris, if you wish.
Brethren, as you can see, you could take any one of these attributes and add it to the marshal, truth, tolerance, brotherhood. But we focused on community and ritual today. Ritual not in the sense of bringing a member into the lodge, but ritualized things as we do out of repetition. Bringing in a grand master and visitations and installing our brethren is also part of ritual. Community is that emphasis on public perception and the marshal assisting the officers within public processions and whatnot as we move forward. We can find this information kind of spread across different resources within Masonry. The Minnesota Code. I would ask you to, although that your job as a lodge officer marshal is not necessarily addressed within the code, but the Grand Lodge Marshal's duties are addressed within the code. Therefore, we could also emulate some of those things that brother does in his duties. The Minnesota Manual on page 71 specifically references your charge at installation, and I would highly recommend that you take a gander at it at your leisure so you can kind of understand what you're actually getting yourself into. Various other resources being the Grand Lodge website, members under members resources, leadership resources, and this current Lodge PowerPoint that we've been presenting today. Thank you for attending this Build a Better Beehive, specifically for the Marshal. If at this time, if you have any questions, either myself or Right Worship Brother Rolf would be more than happy to answer them. Shannon, you are muted.
Thank you much, brothers. Great presentation. I'm going to launch the poll currently, and then let's go ahead and open this up to some Q&A. Brothers? Or feedback or additions?
I like that the presenters got to critique their own work. I'm a little biased.
I got a question. You mentioned the marshal and the funerals and stuff. Could you go through that again, that section about the funerals and the marshal's duties during those?
Well, the marshal at any formal event is required by the way we do our work to essentially form people into the correct lines, put them in the correct order, and then lead them to the place and make sure the brothers know what they're going to do and where they have to seat themselves.
Okay.
Normally, yeah, no, I've been to enough funerals. What happens? The guy that's doing the thing in front, acting as master, says, "All right, get behind me. You come next. You come next," and then they take off. But if we do it correctly, the marshal should be the one leading the whole procession.
Okay. So basically, the organizer making sure everyone's in the right spot.
Right, and he should be the one that actually checks with the funeral home or the funeral director, or make sure that everything is set up in the lodge if it's done in the lodge. So,
Okay.
if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does definitely.
I would take the opportunity if you ever get the chance, especially at a Grand Lodge installation. And that's really when you see the marshal at work. I mean, he's making sure the Grand Master needs to be where he's at. He's lining them up. And at that moment in time, every Grand Line officer is listening and obeying the directives of that Grand Lodge Marshal. So understand that.
Yeah, I've had a couple funerals while master, and I didn't know there was an official coordinator or anything like that. I kind of just took it on myself. But no, it's definitely good to hear specific duties and stuff of each of these positions. That's why I like these things.
Yeah, and I would add to what Chris said, is that at Grand Lodge session, when other grand jurisdictions are introduced and brought forward, it's also the marshal. It's not the deacon.
I'd like to say that I really enjoy these presentations, and I'm learning so much more. Thank you so much for the organizers.
I'd like to have an unbiased opinion, as everyone knows me well. I think this committee does a very good job, and I like the presentators and the chairman. I think they do a bang-up job. I want to applaud them.
Thank you.
I agree. I like these.
Ralph, you touched on something I like that I've seen in some of the lodge assemblies, is that procession of the flag by the marshal. I think it allows a good time for us as we're preparing ourselves for the evening and what's about to take place in our team as Masons, on that reflection. To me, it really rings home the importance of that union under our flag. So I for one, am very favorable of the marshal doing that procession.
Well, I also look at it this way. When you ask him to do that, you say you will present the flag of our country. And one of the jobs of the marshal is to do all presentations of important things. And therefore, the flag is important in our ceremonies. So therefore, he does present the flag.
And to carry it for them we've done that at Nelson, and we've had a former military brother show him the correct way to show it, a young marshal. And what was really cool is to see that young marshal take that little extra height in his step then as he carried that flag, because he knew it was a retired vet that had given him that little wisdom, whispered good counsel. Yeah.
I would like to say that, these presentations that we're doing are meant to show you that it's not just sitting in a chair. That's not your job, is to just sit in a chair. Every position has a duty, although small sometimes. Some may say insignificant at others, but they all combined for that vast machine to function of the lodge, to take a little bit of the burden off of the master, a little bit of that burden off of the wardens, so they can attend to their duties and ensure the whole functionality of the lodge.
Now there's I believe there's somewhere a list of positions and their suggested duties or actual duties and suggested duties or something somewhere out there. Is that on the Grand Lodge website?
Yes, so if you were under the resources that was brought up, when you go on the Grand Lodge website under member resources, if you go under some of the Lodge PowerPoint, there is a Lodge officers training manual that's been out, was put together by Most Worshipful Brother Neil Niedermeyer down back in 2014. That one was very, very extensive in those lists of duties. And, you know, it points out a lot of the things when we were working as a committee of putting this together and putting a crash course, you know, conversation around these duties. It's, we stayed away from schools of instruction and, you know, kind of things in that regard, because a lot of that's there. It's kind of reminding the brothers these additional resources are there, but it takes a little digging, Mike.
Well, we have it somewhere because we've been handing it out the last few years every time we go through voting, and then again in installation, so everyone is aware of their duties expected. But yeah, I couldn't remember where we were getting it from though.
I'm going to share it to the chat here if you guys want to pull it from there.
Perfect.
Worshipful Brother Wendover mentioned an important point too, that the marshal is and can be an installed officer of the line with an apron and a jewel. And not necessarily progressive, but it's just as important. He's an installed officer of the lodge, represents the lodge.
Actually, I look at this, it's in a PowerPoint, so I'm not sure how I would be able to share it that way. Let me see if I can dig it up off the website.
Yeah, I got something. It's a PDF called Officers' Duties.
So it does come up, it is under the, it's not really the one that gives you the full list, but this will give you a link into where they are. And feel free to reach out to me directly. Oops, sorry, brothers.
I think we're real fortunate that our Grand Lodge has supplied so unique resources for us. Because if you look at some of the other Grand Lodge websites, they're not as sophisticated or rich in terms of learning material, and I'm very grateful to our Grand Lodge for that.
Agreed.
And here's one more for you guys. This is the one that works for Brother Mike has referenced. Just a couple you can find out for you.
I'm sorry, what were you saying?
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I thought I'm still sending messages to Mike. I thought I was sending them to you guys. So here is his duties that Mike had referenced. And then
Yep, that's the
here
one.
is the PowerPoints. You can kind of cruise through the list they have here. Yeah.
You know, and understand a lot of this information has already been out there, right? The Minnesota manual is given to every new Master Mason. The website and the information on there has always been there. Masonic code has always been accessible through the Grand Lodge website. And you can download these things in PDF form as well. You can put it on your phone, tablet. If you need a quick resource, you know, Control F will get you just about anywhere in that thing. So most of it's easy to navigate if you're tech savvy. And if you're not tech savvy, I would say find a brother in your lodge who will probably teach you how to navigate that. But it's not a bad idea, no matter what position you hold within your lodge, to have it accessible. Because it's always, you know, kind of awkward for a DR when somebody kind of stands up and asks a random question in the middle of code, and you're kind of like, I don't know. Let's look it up. We can actually have a resource at our fingertips. You know, have your secretaries, you know how to navigate this, have your junior wardens, your senior wardens, and any other officer. Again, I can't emphasize how underused our Masonic manual is. A lot of questions I personally run into from brothers can easily be found within the Masonic manual. So,
I agree. I mean, I put on everything on my phone, and I can't tell you how many times I've been in the middle of nowhere. Someone calls me up with a question. I'm like, hold on a second, let me look it up. You know, something like that. And that's also a big reason why I like Grandview as well, is it's that quick, able to get on my phone and give information that people are looking for.
There's a lot of direct lodge information to your bylaws. I mean, I remember a couple of times in meetings where we had to stop and do what we were doing to look up the bylaw. I think if it was accessible, and not to drive the electronics, the tech, you know, the tech world, but having it right there, and that Control F search function is very, very powerful. Brothers, I think I'm going to stop the recording. If there's not really anything more, I'm going to probably look to close this down in a couple of minutes if there's any closing comments. Thank you, by the way, Mike, for getting that launched.